Hello, everyone. My name is Amy DePretis, and I'm a senior psychology major. You may be thinking that psychology is not one of the humanities, so how did I end up presenting here? Well, when I heard that this year's symposium theme was a conversation on freedom, my mind instantly made a connection between freedom and forgiveness, which is a topic that I am studying in depth for my senior research project. And so I present to you today the intersection of science and the humanities. I'm calling this presentation Forgiveness and Freedom, a two-way street, in which I will use a directional analogy to explain how there is a lot more overlap between these two concepts than you might think. Let's start by defining our terms, as any good scientist would. Freedom means something different to all of us, but for the purpose of this talk, here's my definition. A freedom is something that we are given by a higher power, part of the nature of who we are, but which we can choose whether or not to, as well as when and how to exercise. Likewise, forgiveness is the act of deciding cognitively to extend grace emotionally to cover over an offense or a wrong that someone else has done to us. This leads to the replacing of negative emotions with positive, or at least neutral, emotions toward the wrongdoer. I've borrowed part of this definition from one of my favorite contemporary psychologists, Everett Worthington. Now that we're all on the same page, let's start our journey down our metaphorical road in the first direction, from freedom to forgiveness. Because Christ set us free by pardoning our sins, we are free to forgive. As we recite in the Lord's Prayer, forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. In fact, our primary motivation to forgive should be because we have been forgiven from our own sins. We have been set free from sin once and for all by the work that Christ accomplished on the cross, breaking the chains that bound us, if you will. But we still have to exercise the individual freedom to walk away from sin in everyday circumstances. Likewise, we always have the freedom to forgive, because Christ forgave us first. But we still have to exercise the individual freedom to forgive in each situation. Forgiveness does not come naturally. If it did, there would have been no need for the cross. Rather, it is a conscious decision and must be offered by our own free will. In the realm of clinical psychology, this is called decisional forgiveness, and although it is difficult, we all do have the freedom to make the choice to forgive. But why should we? Why should we put forth the effort to make a decision that is counter to every human instinct, to harbor bitterness and resentment of the wrongs done to us? Even though we have been set free to do it, why is forgiveness worth the cost? This is where we return to the psychological lingo and introduce the second type of forgiveness, emotional forgiveness. You may need to be a neuroscientist to know exactly what unforgiveness does to the brain, although I can tell you it isn't pleasant. But you don't need scientific training to know that unforgiveness takes a toll, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. So to travel the other direction on our metaphorical road, let's consider how forgiveness leads to freedom, and see if we can answer that question from a few slides back about why it's worth the price that our egos need to pay. Emotional forgiveness, again borrowing from Dr. Worthington, explains why forgiving makes us feel so much better. We are released from the burden of those relentless bitter feelings, and are set free to embrace a new mindset on the other side of the offense. What was done to us cannot be erased, but losing the additional pain of bondage to unforgiveness is a welcome relief. But don't take my word for it. Theologian Timothy Keller says in his book, The Reason for God, only when you have lost the need to see the other person hurt will you have any chance of actually bringing about change, reconciliation, and healing. Those three things certainly sound freeing to me. The scriptures teach the importance of forgiving. 7 times 70, anyone? But even though this practice is commanded, it does not negate the freedom. It is still our choice, might I even say our right, to obey. Let's look at the Matthew 18 parable of the unforgiving debtor. When one man was pardoned a great deal of debt, he gained the freedom to live without fear of the tax collectors, but he also gained the freedom to go out and likewise forgive a debtor of his own. His refusal to do so, even though he had just been forgiven himself, landed him behind bars. Forgiveness, then, is both a choice and a responsibility. Although the freedom that we gain from being absolved of our own wrongs is much easier to bear than the freedom to turn around and practice forgiving others, both are equally important. The street goes both ways. So if forgiveness is ours for the giving, then what is stopping us from practicing it freely? Perhaps pride, perhaps fear, perhaps the comfort we receive from holding on to bitterness because we think it will cover the hurt of the wrong done to us. But only forgiveness can truly help that hurt to begin to heal. As we reach the end of the metaphorical road, we have seen that forgiveness and freedom work together in a two-way harmony. Without one, we cannot truly grasp the other. Without first being forgiven, we would not know the freedom to be able to forgive others, nor the incredible emotional and spiritual freedoms that we gain in return. I will leave you with the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. And now in my own words, rather let us drink from the cup of forgiveness, and the thirst for freedom will be quenched for one and all. That brings us to the end of our time. Thank you for listening, and I hope you learned just how important the connection is between freedom and forgiveness.